السلام عليكم، مساكم الله بالخير. نحييكم من جديد في مؤتمرنا مؤتمر العرب والولايات
Good
المتحدة
evening, ladies
الأمريكية
and
المصالح
gentlemen.
والاهتمامات كبيرة
Welcome back
ومتغيرة.
to our conference.
في جلستنا سنتناول مستقبل
Interest and
العلاقات
concern changing
الخليجية
environment.
الأمريكية.
We
حقيقة
will be
نحن تحدثنا
talking
كثيرا
about the future
عن
of the
العلاقات
relations between
فيها اليوم
the
وتحدث فيها
US and
قبل
GCC.
أسبوعين بالتحديد
We have talked a lot
بين
about
أمريكا والعالم الإسلامي.
these
هناك الكثير من
relations.
الحديث
There's a
حول
lot
العلاقات
of
والمصالح.
points to raise
لم
regarding
نمل من الحديث
these
والحديث لم يمل
relations.
منا ولا زال الحديث
Of course, we
مستمرا.
have a lot of topics to
ما هو
cover.
مستقبل العلاقات
What is the future
الخليجية الأمريكية
of the
اليوم
US
بعد
GCC
7
relations
عقود اتسمت
7
بالاستقرار
decades
والهدوء والدفء
after
نسبيا تركزت
the
بشكل كبير على
stability
تبني
of the
نظرية
relations
الأمن
were
مقابل النفط
established,
أو بيع السلاح
security versus
مقابل تصدير الذهب الأسود.
oil
مجلس
or
التعاون الخليجي
weapon
يعتبر من أكبر
purchases in
التجمعات
exchange
الإقليمية
of
التي ترتبط
the
مع الولايات المتحدة
black
الأمريكية بعلاقات
gold.
شاملة ومتعددة.
The US and GCC
وتطور
countries
الاهتمام الأمريكي
have
بالخليج من الإدارة الأمريكية
comprehensive
منذ الستينات
interests,
والسبعينات
and the
حيث
interest
نص
of
مبدأ
the US
كارتر
has grown
في 23
since the
يناير
70s. Carter
1980
principle
على أن أي
in
محاولة تقوم بها أي
1980
قوة خارجية
stipulated
للسيطرة على
that
الخليج
any
العربي
foreign country
ستعتبر
attacking
هجوما
the
ضد
GCC
المصالح الحيوية
region
الأمريكية
will be considered
وسترد عليها
an
بكل
attack
الوسائل
against
الضرورية
US
بما فيها
vital
استخدام القوة
interests,
المسلحة.
and we
لكن
will be
في
retaliated
الآونة
against.
الأخيرة
But
يبدو
recently,
أن العلاقات مع
it
الولايات
seems
المتحدة
that the
وصلت
relations
إلى
with
مرحلة
the
بدأت
US
فيها دول
have
الخليج
reached a
تبحث
state
عن
where
حلفاء جدد
the Gulf countries are
يعوضون غياب
seeking new
واشنطن كما أشارت العديد من
allies to
التحليلات السياسية
replace
الأخيرة.
Washington's
صحيفة
absence.
الجارديان
The
ذكرت
Guardian
أنه لم يعد
has
من
recently
المستغرب
mentioned, and
أن
it is
نسمع أن
not
الاتحاد الأوروبي يمكن أن
unexpected
يصبح حليفا كبيرا للخليج
to hear
كما
that
أن
the
هناك إشارة
EU
إلى الصين
is a
الهند
partner
روسيا
of the
دول
GCC
في أفريقيا
countries, China,
ودول
Russia,
في أمريكا
India,
اللاتينية.
countries in Africa,
وعلى
countries
الرغم
in
من
South
انتخاب
America.
الرئيس الأمريكي باراك
And
أوباما
although
الذي
US
عد
President
في
Barack
حد
Obama
ذاته
was
بالعالم العربي
elected,
مؤشرا على تغير
and
في
it
المزاجية
reflected
الأمريكية
a
مقابل
change in the US public
التطرف
opinion
اليميني
against
المحافظ الذي
the
مثله جورج بوش الابن في ولايته.
conservatism of
غير
George
الآمال تبددت
Bush.
في الواقع
However,
بداية فيما اصطلح
the
عليه
expectations
بتسمية الربيع العربي من وسائل الإعلام ومن
changed,
خلفه بدأت
especially
علامات الخلافات الواضحة
when
البينة
the
تظهر في
US
الأفق
position
بين جارة
vis-à-vis
أوباما
the Arab
في
Spring
الملف البحريني
got
الإيراني
clearer,
اليمني السوري
and then
المصري
the
الليبي
divergence
اللبناني
was
الفلسطيني
reflected when it
أفغانستان
comes to
باكستان وقائمة
different
طويلة ولا
dossiers,
تنتهي.
Iran,
وصولا
Pakistan,
إلى
Afghanistan,
تصريحات
Lebanon,
الرئيس
Syria,
الأخيرة حين
etc.
زف إلى الشعب الأمريكي
Especially the
بشارة أن الولايات
statement
المتحدة
of
ستصبح
Barack
في عام
Obama, who said
2015
that
أي
in
سنتين من الآن
2015
بلدا
the US
مصدرا
will
للنفط
become an
والغاز
oil and
وليس
gas
بلدا
exporter
مستوردا
and
ولذلك
not
فإن الولايات
importer,
المتحدة
and thus the
تستعد
US
للاستغناء
is
عن
preparing
استيراد
to
النفط
do away
في
with
منطقة الخليج
importing
والشرق الأوسط. هل يحتاج الخليج اليوم إلى
Gulf's
استخدام
oil and
وبر
gas?
مغاير والدخول في
So
شراكات
does
متعددة
the Gulf
لحياكة
need
عباءة
to
أو
use a
بشت
different
جديد يحميها
ally
تقلبات
or
البيئة الإقليمية
another
والدولية؟
prospect to
نرحب بكم من
protect
جديد.
itself from these changes?
سنشارك في جلستنا
This
سيشارك
panel
معنا نخبة حقيقة من المحللين والأكاديميين.
will be during this panel Dr. Anthony Korsman, Dr. Abdullah Al-Shaji, Mansour Al-Bogami, and Ragid Al-Sulh will discuss these topics. We start with Dr. Anthony Korsman from CSIS. He was the director of the Office of the Minister of Defense. He has several published publications in the Middle East affairs, and he had a PhD from London. Doctor, the floor is yours. Dr. Korsman, 15 minutes, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have about 15 minutes to deal with some problems in defense and security which are extremely complex. So I'm going to focus on a few fairly simple issues. And there are some areas where I frankly would like to try to correct some of the problems that can occur when you read a great deal of academic literature and you ignore what the United States government is actually doing and saying and how it describes its goals. Let me begin with one statement that I think often gets ignored throughout the world. The United States has no magic wands. It cannot perform miracles, and it cannot from the outside do what countries cannot do for themselves. It can be an effective partner. It cannot be a wizard. I've already noted that the United States government does not plan on energy independence. That may happen, but it is one of the scenarios, and only one, and it is not the scenario the U.S. uses. Now, when we come down to what is actually happening, I have 5 key emerging threats. There are really 6. And in each of these areas, the United States is actively working with the Gulf countries to try to build up their capabilities and is also improving its own capabilities. The United States is not withdrawing from the Gulf. It continues to increase its forces in the Gulf, and this included missile destroyers, a new Special Forces command ship, Special Forces units, new mine ships, patrol ships, and an increase in air power. The problem in this list of things the U.S. can do is what it can't do. And it doesn't really matter whether your name is Pahlavi or Mubarak or Maliki. What we cannot do is save a leader or a regime from himself, from the failures of a country to deal with its own internal demands, its need for change, and its need for improvement. And if expectations come on the basis the U.S. can do this, I would assure you that is not one of the things on this list. Now, those operations listed here are all areas where we are actively working with those Gulf countries that cooperate in exercises, that are building up their forces, and are working with each other. But one of the themes I have to say is the problem is often not U.S. and GCC relations. It is the differences between the Gulf states and the extent to which Gulf states essentially make the GCC ineffective. Now, a point about U.S. resources. People have talked about U.S. defense cuts. The fact is those cuts are in warfighting expenditure. That thick blue line is the constant dollar expenditure on what we call baseline. Those are the U.S. forces that are not related directly to expenditures for war fighting. You will see that that blue line, the hard line, is not going down. And there was a debate early in the year as to whether the U.S. would actually be able to spend far more than the Budget Control Act. Well, the Congress has pretty well concluded the markup. The markup will be significantly higher than the Department of Defense request, not to mention the Budget Control Act. The other problem I see again and again in the Gulf is the idea it is somehow the forces we deploy forward that determine American power. First, Iran and the threats here do not come close to China. By American standards, Iran is a relatively petty military threat. It is obsolete in its air force, obsolete in its surface-to-air missiles, obsolete in its major naval forces, and it has serious problems in its ground forces. If you look at that global pool of U.S. air forces, it basically says that within 46 to 98 hours, we can deploy an immense amount of additional power. And if you look at the lower left-hand corner, you will also see a massive buildup in U.S. stealth capability, which is matched by advances in U.S. cruise missile strike capability. Now, these are the key elements of U.S. power. It takes longer to deploy naval elements, which is why we build up the ships that take the longest to deploy, which are actually the smaller ships. And it is the smaller ships which are most critical to dealing with asymmetric warfare and Iranian air, sea, and missile efforts to close the Gulf. What we don't have is the ability to instantly deploy land forces, although we do have a pre-positioned brigade set in the most vulnerable part of the Gulf, which is what we've started to call the Kuwaiti hinge. And that is because of the obvious presence of Iran and Iraq. Now, look at a different side of this. This is the gap in military spending when you ignore all of the U.S. capabilities and you look at the Gulf. That red line is Iran for 1 year. That tall green line is the total expenditures in the Gulf Cooperation Council. There are some differences over how to calculate these figures, but quite frankly, the problem is not whether you can be a far more effective force, it is whether you make the decisions to be a far more effective force. And look at that second taller green line. That is Saudi Arabia alone. The line next to it that is tall is the UAE. At this point in time, we are talking about two countries which basically are making major steps toward improving their military capabilities. The others are spending, but not in ways which will necessarily improve their capabilities. These are harder figures. They're declassified U.S. intelligence data. That tall line in the far right is the total new arms transfers that the GCC agreed to spend on between 2004 and 2011. That blue line at the far left is Iran. And remember, Iran cannot import advanced weapons, aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, ships. It basically can't find a supplier. The Gulf states are able to buy basically virtually all of the most modern military equipment possible. And this is not new. This isn't a matter of what may happen because these show actual deliveries. And again, that small blue bar to the left is Iran, and that large bar to the right is the total Gulf Cooperation Council. Now, if you look at the two larger bars, one is Saudi Arabia and the other is the UAE. This is, to some extent, a matter of their relative wealth. It's also a matter of intent. Kuwait has had its own internal political divisions. They've had a critical impact on the modernization of its forces. Oman faces serious resource problems. Bahrain, frankly, is small. And Qatar basically uses the U.S. Air Force Base in Qatar as the primary way of securing its capabilities rather than building up forces. This is reflected in the share of what is happening in terms of total spending. That large blue side is Saudi Arabia. The second blue side is the UAE. The problem here is that to have effective forces today, they have to be interoperable in real-world terms. They have to have integrated areas in command and control. They have to be able to draw down on U.S. satellite combat management or systems, surveillance systems, and they have to buy minimal capabilities within the GCC to provide those capabilities. And today, basically, that is not happening. Now, very briefly, in terms of threats, we may or may not be able to deal with the Iranian nuclear threat. I think the odds, as President Obama said, are about 50-50. To date, we have made no progress in any element of the military aspects of what the International Atomic Energy Agency declared. They have denied that their missile forces are seeking nuclear warheads. And basically, we have focused almost exclusively on moving the nuclear agreement forward because when we talk about a broader rapprochement, it's very clear from Iranian literature that we aren't close to a political climate in Iran which could ease relations either with us or with the rest of the Gulf. One of the key areas for the Gulf is to integrate some kind of missile defense system. And this is not simply because of the nuclear dimension. One of the great problems that I see is people focus on the longer-range Iranian missiles like the Shahab. The problem in practical terms is Iran is building up a massive force of missiles with much shorter range, and it has begun to deploy a new series known as the MD series. And the MD-600 is a GPS-guided system. For the first time, you have conventional warheads, which can do a great deal of damage against targets in the Gulf, and not simply something that could be a kind of terror weapon by hitting cities and urban areas. These are the regular missions. And in every single one, as Iran's capability improves, you need more integration, you need faster reaction times, you need tighter interoperability. You cannot afford to have feuding countries that are unwilling to create either common plans or meaningful exercises on their own. And that, in all of these areas, basically characterizes what is happening in terms of the GCC today. These are the mission priorities, and you can judge for yourselves how far the GCC is moving in each of these areas. Throwing money at them is not military effectiveness. You also have the problem of internal security. I think each of the Gulf countries has made real progress here. And in some of these countries, we now have a far stronger U.S. team. We now have not only a U.S. large advisory team dealing with the regular Saudi forces, we have an increased team dealing with the National Guard, which is now a ministry, and an interagency team, which is surprisingly large, dealing with counterterrorism. For all of the tensions between the United States and Saudi Arabia at a political level, in the same period you have added a virtually entirely new mission of trainers and U.S. personnel within Saudi Arabia, and you see similar developments in the UAE and other parts of the region. One of the other areas where the Gulf has made no progress at all, and some of this was discussed earlier, is passive defense. If you have, and you are dependent on extremely expensive large facilities, which become vulnerable to precision bombing or missiles, you need to have passive defense capabilities. If your cities are dependent on one or two desalination plants for their survival, you have to consider how you can deal with a potential attack on those facilities. In practice, this is an area where not only has very little progress been made, but let me note, as Iran expands its precision strike capabilities, having ports to the Indian Ocean, which are within the range of those missiles and strike systems, does not solve the problem by creating new pipelines. And you must assess vulnerability, and vulnerability changes. Now, in terms of priorities for cooperation, there has been a debate over whether you should have a federation, whether you should unite the Gulf Cooperation Council. The fact is, all of these priorities exist. They've existed since 1980. I've been listening to younger officers, to discussions from people within Gulf forces now for that period. And in each of these areas, because of national feuding within the GCC, you've not made that progress. The keys are institutions. You do not need to have some kind of integration or unification. But what you cannot do is continue to have a Gulf Cooperation Council where all of the institutions of an effective alliance do not really exist or are not operating. This is a list which has been proven in the NATO alliance when countries often differed sharply with each other.
Dr. Anthony.
Again, I don't have the time to go through it in depth.
Please conclude.
But I do want to make one last point. If you want to see the numbers, this briefing will be on the website. It goes through the reasons that Iran, is to some extent a hollow threat. It goes through what each Gulf country is doing militarily. And I think it is time for all of you to look at the numbers. Because as I hear people talk about concepts without ever looking at the numbers, my general reaction is strategic studies here need to start focusing as much as possible on facts and as little as possible on conspiracy theories. Thank you.
Thank you, دكتور أنتوني. شكرا لك. شكرا لك. حقيقة ورقة دكتور أنتوني عن التسليح والقواعد الأمريكية ذكرتني بقصيدة للشاعر أحمد مطر التي قال فيها: بدعة عند ولاة الأمر أصبحت قاعدة، كلهم يشتموا أمريكا، وأمريكا إذا ما نهضوا للشتم تبقى قاعدة، فإذا ما قعدوا تنهض أمريكا لتبني قاعدة. ويبدو أن الحال تغير الآن، لا نحن مستمتعين بالشتم ولا أمريكا مستمتعة ببناء قواعد بالخليج. محدثنا الثاني الدكتور عبد الله الشاجي، أستاذ العلوم السياسية في جامعة الكويت، شغل سابقا منصب رئيس قسم العلوم السياسية في الجامعة، وعمل مستشارا خاصا لرئيس مجلس الأمة الكويتي، كما شغل منصب رئيس مكتب الإعلام في سفارة الكويت لدى لبنان. نال الدكتور شاجي شهادة دكتوراه من جامعة تكساس في أوستن، وهو كاتب في مجموعة من الصحف الكويتية والخليجية. دكتور عبد الله الكلمة لك. تفضل.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم جميعا. طبعا متأخرين نحن جدا في الندوة.
So we're very late in this session, and especially when you are the last to speak in the last session of a very long day. So you're going to be facing two problems. The first problem is that many of the things that you're going to say has been tackled already. And the second problem, it seems that everybody has become tired. So please, if you excuse me, I'm going to start straight away. This paper is part of a paper that is going to be published in Middle East Policy in 2014, and it is going to talk about the resetting of the GCC-US relationship. So it is a revisiting of the activation of the GCC-US relationships. It is very clear in the light of the developments that are taking place in the GCC countries and in the Middle East that we are facing a phase of what I call, and some of the GCC researchers, is the GCC era or the GCC moment. So this is an era, whether we agree with the GCC or we do not agree, it is the de facto leader of the Arab region due to the traditional and conservative powers. We have the heart of the countries, or the traditional heart or core of the countries such as Egypt and Iraq and Syria. All these countries are very much, concerned with the situation internally, and it seems that the most influential countries are the GCC countries, the most capable to deal with the Arab countries. So the Arab countries or the Arab world, it's a kind of a body without a head. So these countries are facing problems. That is why the GCC countries have a soft power, and they have in excess of $1.5 trillion, which makes these countries the most flourished economic region between Spain to China, to India. And the number or the total population is only 10% of the whole of the Arab world. So the GCC countries have become a regional player in the Arab countries and also internationally due to their oil capabilities and energy capabilities and gas capabilities, in addition to the sovereign wealth funds that they own, the different sovereign funds. And it is also a donor country that plays a huge role in aiding many countries around the world. So the problem with the United States, it is not because it is going to withdraw from the GCC, and I agree with so many things that have been mentioned by what Mr. Anthony Korsman has said and what Fred has said and other researchers have said, and Daniel also, Professor Daniel, and others. The United States of of America has many options, but the United States of America, our concern at GC countries, we look at it not because it is going to withdraw, not because it is weak, not it is going to retreat, or it needs other sources, or maybe they have reached a kind of self-sufficiency due to oil, shale gas and other sources of energy. This is part of the game, but we are different from the United States of America due to other strategic issues. So these are the strategic issues. The United States look at these issues tactically. We disagree with the United States, and the most important example that we can say here is Iraq. We can mention ISIS has proven that the United States has withdrawn very early. They have not listened to the GCC countries, and they supported the al-Maliki government that is trying to support sectarianism. They did not listen to what the GCC countries have said. When Obama withdrew in 2009, mentioned that he left a stable Iraq and a representative government, and the situation was right in Iraq. That was in 2009, and there is a quote by Obama in which he mentioned all these things. And yesterday, for the first time, he is criticizing al-Maliki, and he says that he needs to reach a kind of reconciliation and try to reach a kind of a consensus and national unity, and we're not going to do anything. We are not going to support you unless you do all these things, telling al-Maliki. So these wrong calculations that have been made by the United States, and whose price it is us who are paying. The situation in Iraq is very dangerous. It is a failure state, and it is threatening the neighboring countries. There is very much concern in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. In the Washington Post, there is an article saying that the neighbors of Iraq are very much concerned, and they have mentioned particularly the United States and Kuwait. So this concern is due to the strategies and miscalculations of the United States that we are reaping the harvest of it. So the situation in Syria and the GCC, they have an initiative vis-à-vis the situation in Syria, but the United States does not see that they can enter, that they can be a kind of they do not want to intervene in a kind of issue in Syria. And the colleague who spoke in the morning was very clear. We know this entrenchment. We know, we understand the ideology and the creed of Obama. He doesn't want to have wars. And I said in one article, he doesn't want to wage any wars, and there wouldn't be any wars within the Obama administration. Even in the Libyan situation, he was leading from behind. They were leading from behind. This is their strategy. Obama, as a president, he was very clear, as one of the colleagues has said today also, from Ottawa, Mr. Ottawa, sorry, he mentioned 4 points that are the priority for Mr. Obama, and these also are our priorities for us, and this is one of the reasons that has led to the withdrawal of Saudi Arabia from the Security Council due to the Palestinian cause and other issues, and in addition to the nuclear issue of Iran. I'm going to talk about it later on. The other problem with the United States, it doesn't use its leverage. The United States has a lot of leverage. They have so many, strengths, but they do not use them accordingly and adequately in order to protect itself and to protect its allies. We do not see them using these points, these strengths against Netanyahu. Netanyahu is using Obama as a puppet, and he's waging a kind of a cold war against Obama. I mean, Obama was hoping that he's going to stop the settlements, and Netanyahu went to Congress, and he was hosted by Congress and was welcomed, and he was met by acclamation more than Obama is met by acclamation. He's got leverage with the Iranians. Hassan Rouhani, the Iranian president, and this is the third point that we see, is the nuclear thing. We in the GCC, we supported this rapprochement between the United States and Iran. that would lead to the freezing of the nuclear program in exchange of what? This is the enigma that cannot be solved. So in exchange of what? What is Iran going to, what is it going to win? They have been, investing in a nuclear program, a covert nuclear program. What are they going to get in exchange of freezing that program? This is the question to be posed. So negotiations took place behind our back. We were not consulted, and one of the member states were part of these negotiations, these secret negotiations, and this is, natural in negotiations, especially when it comes to an influential country such as Iran. But the GCC country are holding discussion. Why the GCC country, who are the most impacted by what is taking place in Iran, if it is being hit or there is any, problem with the nuclear installations, and if there is any problem with desalination plants, if Iran is being hit, we're going to pay the price, and if there is any leakage or any problem with Iran, we're going to be impacted as well. So that is why the discussion that is taking place, what is the end game? What is the result of these negotiations? What is it going to reach to? Is it going to reach to give Iran a free hand for them to play a much higher role, a much more important role, and to implement their grand projects in the region at the expense of the interests of the GCC countries and other countries? This is the question that is being posed by the GCC countries. It doesn't mean that the GCC countries are going to barter with Iran. We see that due to the American role and the Iranian role is presenting itself, and if I were in the shoes of Iran, I would do the same thing. Iran is presenting itself after the end and the failure of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring has failed dramatically. It is not even an autumn. And as for the counter-revolution, all these counter-revolutions have retreated. So what is involved now is counter-terrorism. The region in the Middle East is now tilting towards counter-terrorism. And Daesh is also accelerates this idea.
Terrorism.
ISIS is also accelerating this idea. Today, the Iranian President Hassan Rouhani announces that Iran is ready to enter with the United States in an alliance for them to confront terrorism. So this, this kind of scenario in which, Iran is a main player and the United States overlooks the Iranian projects, the project in which it meddles in the affairs of the GCC countries, because it is so much obsessed with the nuclear issue. So Iran with al-Maliki, with Bashar al-Assad, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and we have moved to another issue, which is by Sisi. All of them are facing and confronting terrorism. They are all trying to combat terrorism. So front and center. So combating terrorism makes the United States and the West to see that as a priority in addition to the nuclear issue. So that means that they are not interested in any other issues. So the United States tries to reassure the region. He has met at the end of March with the King of Saudi Arabia, and also there was a meeting with the defense ministers. There is a reassurance by General Dempsey. He was trying to reassure them. He said, we can be your partner as much as you can be our partners. The United States is not going to leave the region. Even some others talked, and that there isn't a kind of a strategic dimension. The United States is not here for the oil. They have their own investments. They have their own companies. They want to be playing a strategic role. Even the pivot to Asia does not scare us. It is a slogan more than a strategy. So there is no influence that part of the Navy would be given to the Pacific rather than the Atlantic. But the issues of the GCC, of the Middle East, and the market is for the Seven Sisters and also the military-industrial complex, as it was mentioned by my colleagues. $75 billion are the sales of weapons to the GCC countries. We are very much reassured that of the presence of the United States, but the United States has to listen to the GCC countries. It has to respect the concerns of the GCC, and it has to lay the fears of the countries and what is taking place in the region, the counterterrorism and the deals, nuclear deals. All these things the GCC countries should be part of. Why wouldn't they be part of the negotiations 5+1? We are being harmed, but even that, we are not playing a role, and we are last to know. The United States has downgraded the Gulf region, but at the same time, the United States is not going to let them down. And last point, we do not blame the United States, because our disagreements, our problems, we should be solve them internally, because the United States says that we're going to deal with you as one bloc, but not bilaterally. But when it comes and sees disparities and differences between Qatar and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, they would ask themselves what kind of GCC countries we are talking about. Half a minute, please. That is why we in the GCC countries, we should not blame the United States for our divisions. If we would like to reach a kind of a GCC unity between the different countries, the least we can do is to have a kind of a unity militarily and also from a security perspective, and we have to also deal with the world and understand the interests of the world, for that world to understand our interests.
Dr. Abdullah has talked about the current situation in the GCC countries. This might be a new perspective, the Bush perspective and the Obama perspective. Why not having the GCC perspective? The Gulf is taking bigger initiatives. The Gulf can play a leadership role. We'll be talking more later. Dr. Mansour Al-Boghami, he had a PhD from Sciences Po de Lyon. He has 2 books about the strategy in the GCC and the Salafi movement. He got a bachelor's degree in English literature from Oregon State University in the US and a master's degree from France. Dr. Mansour, the floor is yours. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I will be talking about the change in the relation between Saudi Arabia and the United States. I think that the oil for security perspective is changing, and we are currently witnessing a new era when it comes to the relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia. In my paper, I have tried to focus on the following. This shift has a context. The pillars are 2 main points: the internal domestic changes in Saudi Arabia, and most of the researchers did not talk about the internal domestic situation in Saudi Arabia politically. This is the first pillar of the shift, or the change. The second is the new strategy of the United States of America and the region. So for my own reasons, I'm talking about the division of the yields. The reasons for this change: we have a context, we have causes. I will focus on Egypt, Syria, and Iran. The third point is the results. The result will be 1, redefining the relation with the US. Briefly, the cooperation will move from a long-term common interest-based cooperation to a short-term short interest cooperation. This is the first change to the redefining the role of Saudi Arabia in the region. In order to do so, in order for Saudi Arabia to redefine its role, it needs to do two things: moving to institutions when it comes to foreign policies, because it's lacking institutions. Two, developing a leadership strategy. I will start with the context. In theory, when I use this word, I mean something very specific. The capacity to understand the context does not mean collecting data and information regarding a specific event and then analyzing this information. It is progressive, or it is a task that we need to do. We need to redo this prospect. In the beginning, the Saudi foreign policy is ruled by the conventional list. This is how I call it: threat neutralization, legitimacy consolidation, and rest of interest. So, based on the internal domestic situation in Saudi Arabia, the power is shared. There was a disagreement between Prince Saud and Prince or King of Faisal, Faisal bin Abdulaziz, started ruling, and we had the multi-domination system, which means that there are positions for the authority for several members of the ruling family, and they have their autonomous entities within the Saudi government. This sharing authority model makes the coherence process in any policy of the Saudi Arabia, whether domestically or internationally, makes this cooperation lacking at several levels. However, when there is a security threat, these different entities come together in order to face the security threat. So the threat to the Saudi security is the motivation to the cooperation, or behind the cooperation between these divergent entities. The cooperation is more coherent this way, and it maybe explains the reaction, or Saudi Arabia moving from reacting to acting, or to a proactive policy, moving to institutions when it comes to foreign policies, defining the national interests, national security of Saudi Arabia. There is no specific definition, in my opinion, to national security. Where does it start? Where does it end? And there is no specific definition for the Saudi authority and the national interests. And I do not see any political statement based on values and explaining the position of Saudi Arabia internationally based on this political statement that should rely on a value system. Authority within Saudi Arabia is changing. This is an era of change. Saudi Arabia is being or there's a rebirth. So this is the fourth era. I think we are witnessing the fourth Saudi kingdom. Why am I saying so? For two reasons. There is a change that affects the structure of the authority, the bipolar authority, the sons of King Abdulaziz from Hussam bin Ahmad al-Sdiri, and the others. These two powers, this mechanism is changing. So there is a structural change affecting the authority. One of the indicators is dislocation of the Ministry of Defense, Aviation, and the King Sultan bin Abdulaziz was in charge of the Ministry of Defense and the Civil Aviation and the General Inspection Authority, and it was a very sensitive and critical position, and it has powers and authorities that are close to the authorities of the king himself. And the Aviation and General Inspection Authority had a big budget, so it was dismantled. Traditionally, it belonged to that group. So now we have the anti-corruption body that is run by someone who is not member of the ruling family, and here we saw that this elite entity is receding. And second, the Ministry of Interior is no longer ruled by the same group, and during the oath session we saw that it was not attended by anyone other than the king, of course, and the new minister, so was sworn in, and the National Guard minister was not member of the elite team. Moving to institutions, when it comes to the ruling itself, I think that the security force is the active pillar that affects the Baya authority or commission when it comes to the heir apparent, who's gonna rule after the king. So it comes directly after the security committee. So the election of a king is has been affected. So for me, it is very clear that we have a new pyramid of power. We have the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Interior, and the National Guards, and we have the Baya Committee, and then we have the process to choose a new king as a third pillar. This role reminds me of the role of the supreme leader in Iran when it comes to influencing the president in Iran. The second pillar is the change the nature of authority, of power. I think that the new generation, the generation of the grandsons of King Abdulaziz, is changing the nature of power, the nature of competition, or alliance between the ruling elite. Why am I saying so? I think that the older generation is linked to two experiences that were resulted in complicated value systems. First of all, the unification of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the alliances with the tribes and the marriages. So King Abdulaziz used to get married to the daughter of every ruler of a tribe that was vanquished, and in order to continue with an alliance and stop the divergence of interest. So the experience of unification is not inherent to the nature of the new generation. The second experience that the new generation does not know is the conflict between King Saud and King Faisal. The religious institution has the biggest say, the female issues, religious aspects, and who is to be king. And remember the fatwa, the old fatwa that allowed King Faisal to become king instead of King Saud. The new generation was not part of this political process. Their fathers used to deal with this conflict and disagreement. So since they are not linked with that, the way they manage authority will be different. This shift, this change inside Saudi Arabia will influence the relationship of Saudi Arabia. Since I have 2 minutes, I will sum up. Of course, I won't be able to talk in details about my paper. Saudi Arabia and some Gulf countries perceive the rapprochement between Iran and the US as strategic. Why? Because, as we have seen, a new relation between US and China, the tacit ally. It was part of the containment policy of the US foreign policy to contain the Soviet Union. Now we have a new Soviet Union, the new China, and the new China that is Iran. I agree with Dr. Korsman when he analyzed the strength of Iran. Turkey Faisal said that Iran is a paper tiger. So this rapprochement is in a strategic context. The US will be a part in a process that allows one ruler of this region to run this region in order to reduce the burden on the shoulder of the KSA. So Saudi Arabia will be combating the influence of Iran, supported strategically by the US. So I will end here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mansour al-Marzouqi. I cannot summarize what you have said. Maybe Syria is going to withdraw its ambassador. We don't even have an embassy. So here he talked about the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, from strategic relationship to a short-term relationship based on interests. And there are many, many details that he have tackled. He talked about also the internal dimensions and the changes that have taken place. And the last but not least speaker, Raghid Al-Sulh, he is a writer, an independent expert. He is specialized in regional issues, and he worked in Beirut in the American University. He was also a consultant in the Economic and Social Committee of the ESQUA. He has a number of articles and authored many books, and he received his PhD, his BA, from Oxford, and also a master's from Tendon's House. Dr. Raghid Al-Sulh, you have got 15 minutes, please. So the paper was distributed, and it talks about how the decision makers can adopt an Arab reading of what is taking place on how to deal with the problems and the variables that are taking place in the region. So the answer that should be taken for granted is that these possibilities are unavailable, are not to be thought of in the current situation and in this current phase. I'm going to try in this paper to find a number of indicators that would lead me to say that reaching such a solution would not be unrealistic. The Arab countries since 1967 have faced many aggravated situations and challenges, and these turmoils and challenges have had many repercussions on the region, and it's impacted Iraq, Syria, and also Egypt, and also it impacted peace and security in the region. Despite this bleak image, the expectations are that's going to emanate from the transformations and changes that are taking place worldwide. And the paper refers to these variables, especially the different projects that have started after the Second World War in order to build the regional Arab institutions that would save and protect the security of the region and try to reach a kind of a sustainable development. So the future of such a project depends on the regional players. Those players might oppose or not oppose this project, but what is common between themselves is that they have the opportunity to either activate or to hold such a project. So my paper tries to see how these players have tried to adapt the situation and how they have been supporting this project in the light of the different changes that are taking place. So there are four players, the United States and also the ruling elite in the Arab world and also the capitalists in the Arab world and also the international institutions. So as for the United States, so concern from the expansion of the Soviet Union has led to fear from the part of the United States vis-à-vis the different projects, especially the Marshall Project after the Second World War. So what has pushed the United States to take such a position is to save Europe from any hegemony of Russia. In parallel of these fears and concerns, there is also another problem, which is the increase of power of the Soviet Union. These concerns have led to the United States to take a position similar to their position vis-à-vis Europe. And this project was there, available, and it materialized itself in the Middle East Center that was able between 1940 and 44 was able to reach great success. As Wilmington has said, the director of the center, it has led to an increase in commercial exchange between the Arab world and also increase in agriculture and the development of the infrastructure and also industrialization. This project started as a British project, but in the 40s there were demands to Arabize this project and to transfer its management to Egyptians in particular and Arabs in general. Despite all these justifications, the United States decided to end this experience, and this is in response to their own interests. So this position has inaugurated a policy by the United States against projects of the Arab world. After that, we had a number of issues that had led to commitment of military supremacy by Israel against all Arab countries. And Wali al-Din Hilal, he said that there was a weakness in coordination between the Arab countries and also to reduce the capabilities of the different Arab countries. And the policy continued in the 90s of the 20th century when there were other projects that are against the Arab projects. And the war on Iraq shed light on the position of the United States vis-à-vis these projects, especially when Paul Woolford, the assistant of the Ministry of Defense in the United States, when he mentioned or talked about the Woolford law, which says that the United States is trying to intervene in any projects that would be inimical to the security of the United States. So taking into account this project by the Arab world, we can say that reducing the presence of the military, US military in the region would reduce the negative impact and also would reduce the impediments that impede the application of these Arab projects. As the military presence has contributed to the weakening of the different incentives of these Arab projects, this presence and the retreat and the regression of its importance would lead to find and activate new security alliances as a substitute for any in the other international alliances. From the other hand, and taking into account the Arab-American relationships, we can tell and say that retreat in the interest of the United States and the existence and presence in the region can open and give the opportunity to develop the situation and reinforce the situation. We have to say that the United States of America had good relationship and a good position in the region during the second half of the 20th century, after the deployment of its forces in the region. And at the same time, and in comparison with other great powers, the relationship between the Arab countries and France and Britain have been enhanced greatly after the withdrawal of the British and French powers from the region, and after the protection of the Arab countries has seen an end. As for the ruling elites in the Arab world, these elite powers, they are heading a kind of a regional regime, and Bozan in London University said this is exceptional in terms of its power. Bozan says that the power and the strength of this regime goes back to a number of factors because these countries, these regimes have the highest reserves of oil and gas, and the strength of this regional regime or power does not appear in how integrated it is between the different countries, but on the contrary, in its role of how to protect the borders of these countries from these integrating projects. So instead of joining regional blocs in the different Arab countries, the justification for entering into security agreements is very strong when it comes to countries that have high income, but they do not have any kind of security immunity. And this exacerbates the challenges that these countries are facing and puts the Arab states in a position to revisit the different proposals that they have in order to guarantee the security of the region. And most importantly is the following. First, proposals in the international framework try to renew the American guarantees vis-à-vis the protection of the security of the GCC countries. This is after the Iranian-US negotiations, or within these negotiations, the United States can reiterate, can underscore its guarantees for security of the region. And despite, irrespective of how these initiatives are serious, these systems that have been imposed on the region after the First World War, they have given the same guarantees, but these guarantees did not make France to remove Skandaron from Syria and to annex it to Turkey because they wanted the Turks to become part of the allies of the European countries. And this does not make United Kingdom rethink the fact of giving Aleppo to Turkey. So relying on these variables and changes that are taking place and so the elections that are taking place in November in the United States, and also there are expectations that the many leftist political parties are going to reach power, and this is going to be also the hardliners in the United States are expected to come to power, and this is all going to have an impact, especially against Iran and its allies. But I think these stakes are not seen properly. It is not sure if the Bushes win the elections that they're going to give real protection to the Arab countries against any other external challenges or problems. Secondly, proposals within the GCC, and these proposals are either having direct negotiations or negotiations between Iran and the GCC countries. And I do not think that these negotiations would lead to the results that we want due to the imbalance between the different powers, between the Arab countries in the GCC and Iran. There are a number of proposals within the Arab framework, but these solutions start and end with a number of initiatives, bilateral initiatives, and these bilateral initiatives can reinforce the balance of power between Iran and the Arab countries, but it will not be helpful to confront all the challenges on the different fronts, not only when it comes to the Arab-Iranian relationships, but other challenges such as the challenges of Israel, terrorism, and other kinds of challenges. Many of these proposed solutions are built on a kind of a doubt on the Arabs' capability for them to be able to protect themselves by themselves. And these doubts do not take into account two main experiences, in my opinion. The first one is the October War, and the second issue is the Iran-Iraq war, and how they can use their strategic accounts in order for them to be able to protect their security. Although sometimes other external countries intervene to put pressure for them to make concessions. There are also, as I said, the two main phenomena in the Arab world, and I think it's only one main phenomenon, is the role of national capital in order to kind of reinforce and implement this Arab project. And this role is to be implemented by a number of parties, including the General Union of Agriculture and Industry, which is a lobby that can reach a high level of cooperation between the different Arab countries. And as Giacomo Liciani has said, in the womb of this Arab country, we have a national bourgeoisie that feels the need to expand the markets and to expand the national markets, and also to reach a high level of complementarity and cooperation between the different Arab countries. Thank you very much, Dr. Raghid.
I know for a fact that talking about soccer and the 2014 World Cup in Brazil is far more interesting than politics and strategic issues. Now we have room for Q&A. Let's start from the left. Please be brief, concise. Hassan Hai from Khartoum, Dr. Abdullah Al-Shaji, and other panelists. My question is about the impact of the disagreement when it comes to the position of GCC countries vis-à-vis the US policy, and if the relation between GCC countries and Iran improves based on the Saudi invitation to Iran and the Omani position and Kuwait's position, what would be the influence of this improvement on GCC internal relationship? So if we have, historically, if we have a foreign threat, GCC countries are together. But would that influence the GCC countries?
Dave Ottaway. I'd like to bring us down to the here and now. We're talking about GCC-U.S. cooperation. We have a major crisis in Iraq. We have common goal of holding that country together.
What do you think the GCC should do, and what do you think the U.S. should do?
Thank you. Got it. Here.
In my opinion, there was a missing point when it comes to the relation between the US and GCC countries, the post-Arab Spring revolutions, and the influence of the Arab Spring on the relationship between GCC countries, specifically Saudi Arabia and the US. When the US led Mubarak since 2011, and the impact of that role on the region and the interference of Saudi Arabia and GCC countries when it comes to the US initiatives. My question is to Mr. Dr. Korsman. How do you see the role of Iran and the status of Iran after the deal or the agreement that is currently taking place between the US and Iran? What is the prospect of this agreement? What is the end game? Mohammed Al-Shubrani. My question is addressed to Dr. Abdullah and also to other panelists. It is about the Gulf Iranian relationships. Several people think that there is a harmony between GCC diplomacy and the Iranian diplomacy, and this is a pragmatic shift. Do you think that there is a shift or a change? In your opinion, is there a strategic change that is being prepared in the region under the umbrella or the patronage of the United States when it comes to the GCC Iranian relationships? Especially that we are seeing quick and fast agreements. Thank you. Thank you. Last question. Microphone, please.
Can you use the mic, please?
So the topic was about the future of US-GCC relations. Unfortunately, I did not see the future in the discussions. I have seen a description of the past and the current situation with some slight mentioning of the future. There is a pessimism when it comes to Iran, the Iran of Rouhani. I do not suppose that Iran will play the role of Iran, the Shah's Iran, so the police of the Gulf. So I don't see this role happening. Last question. Mahmoud Hamad, Cairo University. To Dr. Abdullah and the rest of the panelists, I agree with you that the influence of GCC countries in the region is very vital and critical. But what are the problems facing these countries domestically, internally, before thinking about the regional and international role? Dr. Anthony, let's start with you. 2 minutes, please.
The relation between GCC and US policies.
Let me take on two aspects of this. At present, the United States is committed to approximately 10 years' worth of major arms deliveries and assistance efforts to Saudi Arabia and to the UAE. To a lesser degree, it is committed to building up the forces of Oman and Kuwait. This is a massive set of ongoing transfers, but it is a set of transfers which is not being coordinated in any effective way between the Arab states. That relationship is going to continue with anything I know about the agreements with Iran. Let me again remind everyone that this is a P5+1 agreement where the U.S. is holding private negotiations. It has not moved beyond the nuclear dimension. It is unclear we will get the nuclear dimension. If we do, almost all of the other aspects of the Iranian threat, included precision-guided weapons, which are now becoming a major problem of their missile force, will continue. And both we and the Gulf states will have to deal with that reality. To deal with Dave Ottaway's question, the problem we really face with Iraq is that since early 2013, we have consistently, quietly pressed Maliki to reach out to both a more sensible dealing with the Kurds, but particularly to open up to a more national government with the Sunnis. We have had some repeated promises. They have been broken consistently, and they have been under increasing pressure from U.S. officials. We have kept it at a moderate level, officials like the Deputy Assistant Secretary McGurk. But at this point in time, we have not had any meaningful response from within the Iraqi government. If we can get a response that says they will actually reach out to the Sunnis, then we should probably support them with airstrikes, which they probably need, or they obviously need. But if this remains a civil war on sectarian level, where we are dealing with a prime minister who only wants us for his ends and his personal power, I do not believe the United States should provide him with that kind of military support, because we would effectively have to target not just ISIS or ISIL, but Sunnis which have perfectly legitimate complaints against the Maliki regime.
Do you have any comments? First and foremost, I have mismanaged my time. I apologize because I focused on one aspect. When it comes to the prospect and the future of the US-GCC relations, there will be a major change. The alliance will not come to an end. There's a lot of common interests, but this close alliance throughout the last 6 decades will witness a change. Saudi Arabia will have a bigger margin to take initiatives. We have seen this in Bahrain, the direct intervention, and there was a strong disagreement when it comes to Egypt. So Saudi Arabia will have to be a leader in the region, because in my opinion this would be the only way to defend the security interests, because the security of Saudi Arabia is not only limited to the geography, to the location. So there are areas of influence that make Saudis defend their own national interests. There is some disagreement with the US when it comes to Syria, Iran, and several dossiers. Or like the refusal of purchasing drones. So Saudi Arabia asked to buy 75 drones from China, and the cooperation will move from a relationship or cooperation based on security to short-term cooperation, and I think this is a dramatic change. Dr. Abdullah, the questions are in the same context. The relationship between GCC and the US. Unfortunately, since the establishment of the GCC, the US agrees through the Minister of Defense in Manama to sell GCC countries defense systems, unified defense systems. When the US defense minister asks that the yearly meeting, the strategic GCC US conference with ministers of foreign affairs and ministers of defense, I think this is a progress that the Gulf countries should wisely use, because it is for the first time that the US is dealing with GCC countries as one system and one entity. unfortunately, this has come in an era where GCC countries are in disagreements among themselves. We have seen withdrawal of ambassadors, while the US is dealing with us as a group. So this is unfortunate, and as I have said previously, the Gulf countries should have a unified position to benefit from the change in the strategy of the US. The United States will reduce its presence. Nixon's principle had pillar states playing important roles when it comes to the security and strategy of the US. So forming a GCC force might play a role to balance the situation in the regions. And regarding the disagreement between the GCC and the US regarding the Arab Spring, there is a disagreement, especially in Egypt. Reaching Hosni Mubarak reminded us of how Carter's administration let go the Shah, and dealing with Sisi, General Sisi, the new president in Egypt. GCC countries consider that the US needs to understand the situation in Egypt. The US does not consider this a coup. It has a road map and it wants it implemented. So there is a new front to combat terrorism and deal with political Islam. It is being dealt with by main GCC countries and also Egypt. Of course, regarding the role of police of the Gulf, Iran is not the police of the Gulf. Iran is very smart to present itself with its allies in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon as the main player against or combating terrorism. So this is the advantage of Iran as a pillar state playing a major critical role. The role is not the police of the Gulf. Iran needs to present these services, offer these services to secure for its security and the security of the region. regarding مصر أوروي ما نحن بحاجة إليها بالنسبة للولايات المتحدة الأمريكية والدول الخليجية. الآن نحن ندفع الثمن بسبب إدارة أوباما التي لم تضع الضغط على إدارة المالكي، مع أن صديقي الدكتور كولمز قال أننا تحدثنا عن هذا الموضوع. رئيس مجلس الوزراء مالكي أتى بعد اتفاق بين الإيرانيين والأمريكيين. لم تستعمل هذه القوة قوة الدفع الأمريكية ونحن نحصد ما تم زرعه. إذا لقد تلقيت خبر بأن جورج بوش طائرة جورج بوش في منطقة الخليج. إذا الطائرة الحربية سوف تكون في منطقة الخليج في حال قرر الرئيس أوباما أن يأمر بضربة عسكرية جوية ضد داعش. إذا لا نلعب دور لحماية أنفسنا من هذه المسألة التي تنتشر في المنطقة برمتها. ما من أحد يتحدث عن سوريا الآن. داعش العراق هو موضوع الساعة ونحن ندفع الثمن. Thank you. I would like to thank you all, Dr. Anthony Kurtzman, Dr. Abdullah Shaji, Dr. Mansour Al-Bagmi, Dr. Raghid Al-Salah. Thank you all for bearing with us. See you tomorrow.
السلام عليكم.